Next, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the first of the two live speakers today. This is Annie Hernandez, my Annie O.
Oh boy.
She's going to talk about what it's like to be a young person who starting their career. This is a voice that we need to pay attention to. This is the voice of the youth. So Annie, take it away.
Oh boy. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annie Hernandez. I'm Tom Sharfstein's stepdaughter to be, and it's an absolute honor to address you all at this year's StutterFest. Before I get started, a little about myself. I've stuttered since I was 5 years old. Although I currently work as a research technician at the Wertheim U.S. Scripps Institute in Jupiter, which is basically my dream job. One of my favorite hobbies is singing and songwriting. A lot of you probably know that you don't stutter when you sing. When I discovered this in middle school, I found great joy and an outlet in music. And I began composing my own songs when I was 13. I've written 15 so far. I may have never discovered his gift if I didn't stutter. I also may have never met my stepdad to be. Tom and my mother met at a stuttering conference back in 2017, a conference that my mom attended because of me. So you're welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
I say these things to show you that stuttering has brought a lot of good in my life. But stuttering itself and the good it can bring are two very different things. Let me ask you all something you most likely have been asked at some point. If there was a magic pill that could cure stuttering, would you take it? That question was posed to me for several years at stuttering conferences, and my answer was always the same. Most people answered no, saying things like, it's part of who I am, or I wouldn't be the person I am today without my stutter. I felt crushing shame whenever I heard these overwhelmingly positive sentiments, so much that I never shared my answer out loud at these conferences. But personally, I have grown tired of stuffing my feelings down and putting on a happy face, as so many have done since the beginning of the stuttering acceptance movement. So now, I will share my answer to the magic pill question in front of a global audience. Absolutely, I would take that pill, no questions asked. I would be the first person in line. Why do I say this? Well, because stuttering sucks. Dozens of stuttering support organizations around the world, like the WSN, would not exist if stuttering didn't suck. But this reality has unfortunately become taboo among people who stutter. The very people who are supposed to understand our struggles, unlike anyone else, have become the ones who, intentionally or otherwise, have silenced stories like mine. So today, I'll be sharing some hard truths about the reality of stuttering in everyday life and critiquing the stuttering acceptance movement, and sharing a little bit of my story along the way. Let's start out by looking at a day in the life of a person who stutters. Stuttering can permeate into every single aspect of our lives, especially if it's severe like mine is. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hernandez, what are you talking about severe? You haven't stuttered much at all, you fraud. Well, there's a reason why I've been so fluent as I'm speaking to you all now. I'll share it with you later. Anyway, the unspoken reality of stuttering is that it is physically, socially, and emotionally debilitating. I'll start with hard truth number one. Stuttering is physically debilitating. It makes the simple act of speaking feel exhausting. If you stutter severely, you know this on perhaps a spiritual level. You're communicating with others as you normally do. You experience a block, You desperately try to push through it. And by the time you get through the block, not only do you feel like you just ran a marathon, but the subject of the conversation already changed. If that's you, you are not alone. When I started my job a year ago, I was fresh out of college, trying to adjust to a new routine. You all probably know that big life changes can cause an increased frequency of stuttering. That's exactly what happened to me. My speech around my new colleagues was terrible at first. It physically hurt to talk to them because I was blocking on every other word I spoke. So instead of asking questions, I struggled silently because I stutter. That leads me to hard truth number 2. Stuttering is socially debilitating. Conversing with others is a whole lot harder when it feels as exhausting as it does. Thankfully, we live in the digital age. There are so many other ways of staying connected without having to deal with stuttering, like emailing and texting. These have become godsends for me, and maybe even for you too. But after relying on screens to communicate for years and years, it can feel pretty isolating. Going back to my work story, to this day, I will sometimes email or text my colleagues if my stutter is particularly severe. I'm thankful to have an avenue of communication where stuttering isn't an issue. But my heart breaks a little more every time I push send. Why? Because I don't want a screen to separate us. I want so badly to be able to speak with them in person, to connect on a personal face-to-face level. Sometimes I can't, and it feels wonderful. But when I can't, it pains me in a way that words cannot describe. This is the epitome of loneliness. And there are moments where the only way to flush it out is a good cry, because I stutter. That leads me to my third and final hard truth. Stuttering is emotionally debilitating. A 2021 study in the Journal of Fluency Disorders found that young adults who stutter have a significantly greater risk of anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts than their fluent counterparts. And it's not that hard to figure out why. We humans are social creatures. We were made for face-to-face, real-life connection. Stuttering can directly or indirectly affect our connections with others, especially if we choose to communicate mainly through digital media. And this can have devastating consequences on our emotional health. I'm actually part of this statistic. I have generalized anxiety disorder, and my stutter and my anxiety are a power couple in all the wrong ways. I give presentations at work about once per month. And as I prepare for my presentations, I naturally become concerned about the severity of my stutter. That concern often increases my stuttering, which makes me worry even more, which makes my stutter even more severe. It's a vicious cycle, one that is not easily broken, and one that requires me to rehearse my presentations endlessly, simply to ensure that I communicate efficiently. Here I go. The worst part is that instead of showing off my achievements and taking pride in the work I put in, which, believe me, is a lot, I am simply focused on getting through it as quickly as possible so we can all get back to work. Preparing for these presentations is often a very emotional period for me, Exhibit A, because I stutter. So far, we've looked at the unspoken reality of living with a stutter. Now, let me share my humble opinion on how the stuttering acceptance movement fails to acknowledge this reality and does more harm than good. So what exactly is the stuttering acceptance movement? This is the idea that stuttering should be embraced, not necessarily improved. Now, I'm not talking about simple positive thinking here. This is much more extreme than that, basically implying that stuttering is a badge of honor, not a disorder. Let me give you an example of the types of opinions that dominate the stuttering acceptance movement. In an article on the Baffler, one person who stutters critiqued the quest for a drug that would cure stuttering, a magic pill, so to speak, claiming that stuttering is, quote, a trait that confers transformative powers. We wear our vulnerability on the outside, and that invites emotional intimacy with others. We slow down conversations, fostering patience. We give texture to language. We gauge character by our listeners' reactions. We are good listeners ourselves, unquote. Now, this person's insights are not wrong in and of themselves. People who stutter, by definition, are more vulnerable than the average person. And we do slow down conversations, for better or worse. Nevertheless, I respectfully disagree with this point of view. The problem is that viewing stuttering and the complications it brings as quote unquote transformative powers is simply not realistic. Let's be honest. Who enjoys having a huge block in front of their boss, their friends, or even their loved ones? Who would rather email or text someone they care about over talking to them in person? Have you ever heard anyone say, I love to stutter? I don't know about you, but it's hard to view the condition that has caused so much turmoil in my past and even in my present as a transformative power. Now, let me be clear here. This does not stem from a place of shame, but from a place of strong dislike for stuttering, borderline hatred. But it appears that very few, if any at all, want to talk about experiences like mine, preferring instead to label negative attitudes as taboo and mindlessly fix those that have a bad image of their stutter. This stuttering pride is not the kind of pride we should want to inspire within others. When people like me don't feel welcome to share their stories, we miss out on having candid discussions with one another about just how difficult living with a stutter can be. Ironically, we people who stutter, who are naturally more vulnerable around the fluent community, have walls of toxic positivity up around each other, failing to acknowledge the difficult reality we share. We all lose when this happens. But the potential consequences of this stuttering acceptance movement are far more profound than that. I fear that the stuttering community will be condemned to stagnation if the stuttering acceptance movement keeps gaining ground the way it is right now. You see, I like to argue that acceptance is the enemy of personal progress. Let me say that one more time. Acceptance is the enemy of personal progress. What do I mean by that? If you think about it, the reason our society is so advanced today is because our ancestors refused to accept their world just the way it was. I'm a scientist, and scientific and medical breakthroughs happen because we refuse to accept the fact that millions of people have died from diseases like smallpox and polio. We have vaccines for this very reason, and both of these diseases have been eradicated thanks to them. What does this have to do with stuttering? Let me show you. Last October, I had to give a presentation in front of all of my colleagues via Zoom. I practiced and practiced for a presentation that was only 5 minutes long. But even so, I stuttered quite severely throughout the whole thing. By the end, I felt like I got ran over by a train. I teared up after the meeting and tried to hide it from my colleagues, but 2 of them noticed and asked what happened. I explained that I'm not normally self-conscious about my stutter, but that I just felt tired and embarrassed. They validated me and told me that when I speak, they just hear me. They accepted me in the wonky way I talked, and I appreciated them even more for that. but I did not accept it at all. That frustrating experience, coupled with the insane amount of preparation required for me to simply be fluent, prompted me to find a more efficient way to present my data while still presenting in person in front of everyone, just like everyone else. And I found a little miracle called delayed auditory feedback. It's an app that echoes everything you're saying in your headphones, and it significantly reduces stuttering. I'm using it to give this talk right now. And it's the very reason I'm able to take just 20 minutes of your time rather than an hour. I tried it at the next lab meeting, and my stuttering and my confidence significantly improved. For the first time, I felt like I fit in with my lab group simply because I was able to do what they did. My point is that if I had accepted my stutter just as it was, I would be stuttering severely through every presentation. But because I didn't accept it and wanted to change it, I searched for something new. And what I found has truly changed the way I do my job for the better. In the same way, if you refuse to accept your stutter and search for ways to change it, I can almost guarantee you'll grow as a communicator and as a person. And while some say you can't change stuttering, I say you never really know until you try. As I wrap up here, I hope you've gained some insights about the harsh reality of stuttering and how the stuttering acceptance movement may not be as uplifting and empowering as it sounds. Because truth be told, the magic pill question is bound to pop up somewhere in your lifetime. If your answer is no, I respect that. And good for you. Just make sure you're honest with yourself and be respectful of those who may have a different perspective. And if your answer is yes, I hope my story has inspired you to be real and honest with your fellow stutterers. Because someone else is bound to be struggling too. My hope and prayer is that your story is the one that starts that honest conversation that the whole room, whether they realize it or not, needs to have. Thank you.